Hi, everyone. Hello. Well, welcome. And it's very good to see you all again here today. And for those who join us for the first time today, I'm Amanda Ferber. I'm the founder of Architecture Hunter, and it's a pleasure to host today's webinar. Here at Architecture Hunter, we truly believe in architecture as a tool for culture, transformation, and dialogue. Our webinars are designed to go beyond images, focusing on ideas, processes, and the thinking behind projects. Today, we are happy, very happy to welcome Ema Peter and Rasmus Hjortshøj. I don't know if I probably pronounced it incorrectly. I'm so sorry. But for a conversation titled Through the Lens, Capturing Space. This session will explore how photography become a powerful tool to interpret architecture, not just as a documentation, but as a way of revealing atmosphere, intention, and the lived experience of space. Our conversation will last around 20-25 minutes, and the end will open for a Q&A session, which will be led by Rafaela Galafassi, who is part of the Architecture Hunter team. She's the editorial coordinator. So feel free to send your questions in the chat as we go, or if you prefer, after the conversation. So let's introduce Emma. Emma is an internationally recognized architectural photographer based in Canada, working globally with over 2 decades of experience. And she's known for her masterful use of natural light and her ability to capture the emotional resonance of the built environment. Her award-winning work has been featured in leading publications such as Architectural Record, Design, Dwell, Wallpaper, The Local Project, Architecture Hunter, The New York Times, and has become a defined visual signature for some of the world's most renowned architecture firms. So, without further ado, it's a pleasure to welcome Ema Peter. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Emma.
There you
Emma,
go. I'm unmuted. Like, hopefully you can see me shortly.
we can hear you, and now we can
There you
see you.
go. There you
Hi.
go. Hi. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm gonna share my screen and I will start the presentation.
Okay. I can see many trophies behind you too.
Yes, definitely. Like I always try to show them as much as possible.
Yes.
Um, there you go. So I wanted to start. So thank you so much to you and to the Architecture Hunter team for having me. Um, I'm really honored to share a little bit about my work and about my process, and perhaps most importantly, the lineage I feel I belong to. And that's why this is kind of the classical cinema influence. People often ask me, what influences my photography, expecting me to name other photographers. And I have often said how much the Magnum photographers, the photojournalists, have impacted me. And I am in love with this image. This is one of those iconic images of René Bory, done in the 30s in Brazil, that made me want to photograph architecture in a more dramatic way. He saw architecture around the world in so differently, so uniquely. He added the human perspective and that sense of human mystery. And more looking at his images, I realized my primary inspiration actually comes from cinema, and especially the great masters of classical film. And this is rooted in my childhood. My father was a film cameraman, and I grew up around some of the most progressive Bulgarian filmmakers. My childhood passed in constant observation on the movie set, and those are few images of him and his colleagues I have from those times. I was often on set, sleeping on back of trucks full of equipment, watching crews build the sets and lighting. And I remember the directors very passionately explaining how the shot should be done or shouldn't be done. And they turned day into night, summer into winter, created incredible scenes. And I have to say, it was truly magical. And today I want to share how that language of cinema, rhythm, light, narrative, and emotional architecture deeply informs the way I approach photographing buildings. Because architecture and cinema are often treated as separate worlds, but for me, they're part of the same continuum. Both create spaces for human experience, both rely on movement and memory, and both are always negotiating between reality and imagination. I do it all the time. And the decisive moment, I have to start there because I talk about it so much. The decisive moment is a term by the famous photojournalist Cartier-Bresson. This is the moment where the eye, the lens, the heart, the mind, the scene, architecture, people, all of it align into a unique frame. But with the years, I realized that my decisive moment is more the images of Van Gogh. His images are poetic, they're cinematic. He did a lot of work in the darkroom. Even the line you see here that is perfectly hitting the ground, this is done in the darkroom. And his images are almost like a movie in a frame. You can stop and look at them absolutely forever. I mean, look at this. This is a whole story. You create a story. And most people think photography is still and cinema is moving. But anyone who has watched a classical film knows that not every moment moves. A great director will let the frame breathe. Ozu lets a kettle steam. Tarkovsky letting the rain fall forever. I'll let this frame play for a second. Because for me, this is from Stalker. It's so simple, but at the same time, it's so visually impactful. And it's a still frame in many ways. And Antonioni, the passenger, the window after a character has left, he creates a frame in a frame, observes life in a very different way, and creates deeper interest in what we're observing. I feel here like I'm peeking in a different world. And those moments taught me something very, very essential. A still image isn't the absence of movement, it's the presence of intention. You have to have this intention. And this image specifically is very choreographed. I'm standing in the middle of a light colored kitchen where there was light furniture. Everything is reflecting in the window of the courtyard. But I wanted to create somehow a moody image, focus on this incredible room of nature. And of course, it was raining, it's Vancouver. But I wanted to show how we can create sun in the rain, how the rest of the house can disappear. And this is achieved with the technical part. We added lighting from the upper floor, you can see it, to make the courtyard brighter than the rest of the house. And this is the way all the reflections disappeared. And connections. I wanted to do connections home and outdoor, interior and exterior, human interacting with nature privately at home. And this was in the pandemic times. So when I wait for the light to create shadows through the trees on a facade or for the shadow to align with structural line, I'm doing exactly what film directors does. We're choreographing time because the shadow is so fast, but the preparation is long because um, that time waiting for the light, watching, anticipating creates such an emotional energy inside of the frames. And this image specifically, I saw the shadows that a tree created on translucent panels of the building. And I knew if I was lucky enough and I catch the diver in the perfect position, and bear in mind she jumped only twice, I'll get that great shot. Because it's a fragment of a second, that's all it takes. But understanding light initially takes patience. And cinema taught me patience from very early on. And he taught me that the world reveals itself to those who are willing to stand still long enough to see it. And to be honest, now I do not have to wait at all. I can see so much so quickly. Now it is almost overwhelming when I enter a building, but when you learn to see properly, a building, it can truly reveal its soul. I treat them as people always. In cinema, light is never just illumination. It's character, it's conflict, it's psychology. And film noir, I give as an example a lot because harsh diagonals, collision between darkness and light. And those films taught me that shadows aren't something to avoid, they're something to use. They create depth, they create drama, they reveal as much as they hide. And when I photograph architecture, I often try to approach it like a cinematographer. Um, because there's purpose always in the way they do things, asking questions like, what mood does this light evoke? What part of the space becomes the protagonist in the light? What emotional arc there is between morning and evening, and how do I grab the viewer? Because this is our biggest goal. This image grabs me always. And this is a white hallway that can be photographed as a white hallway. Nothing wrong with that. But early morning, with the streaming lights, this white hallway can be so much more. You can create mood, you can create depth, you can create perspective, define the person in the shot, and it's creating your own movie. I felt like this. Or it's in this one late afternoon where the warm color takes over and the shadows of architecture and nature blend and create their own patterns. It almost looks like a painting. You just need to see it and you need to let the light create its magic. And I specifically love this one. And later on, when I was wondering why I'm so attached to this shot, I remembered a movie I watched years and years ago called Roma by Fellini, where in a scene in the middle of the night on an empty square, there's only one light in the building that switches off. But you know, I don't reference in my head cinema when I shoot. Everything comes as a natural emotion. But I'm sure the movies I watched as a child have trained my eye. They've created this impact and memory. And buildings are not static, they respond. They breathe with the day. And just like in cinema, the light tells the story long before the human appears, because in this specific shot, the scene was beautiful, dark and moody. But adding that human element, the woman in the white shirt, not only allowed the compositional perspective to shine, but also showed the metal in the reflection, the materiality. And this is where exploration begins, when you can add an element that quietly speaks in the light. And no one understood better than visual architecture better than Alfred Hitchcock. If you watch Vertigo or North by Northwest and you see a filmmaker obsessed with geometric psychological precision, his frames are so intentional down to the millimeter. You can see, I love the frame on the right, empty road and the tension between the two figures. It's one of my favorite scenes because, like Tarkovsky, so simple but so impactful. And you can have an empty road and still create something mesmerizing. And the other one I love is Stanley Kubrick because he's not a filmmaker. He's a meticulous architect of the cinematic frame. His films are renowned for their geometric precision, obsessive symmetry, and exacting control over space and perspective. And I wanted you to see the short video, as it was striking for me the way he saw the world through the camera. In movies like The Shining, it's amazing, right? And Space Odyssey, Kubrick turns architecture itself into a character. The vast daylight corridors of the Overlook hotels or the cold space station, they're just not background. They shape the narrative, creating unease, isolation, or transcendence. The way Kubrick positions the camera in these spaces forces the viewer to engage with architecture on a very psychological level. And what fascinates me and what I try to emulate is Kubrick's use of vanishing points, leading lines to draw the eye deeper into the frame. Because his symmetrical compositions create a balance that feels almost architectural. Yet the slightest disruption in order introduces emotional complexity and suspense. So from Hitchcock, I learned tension, and from Kubrick, I feel I learned order. And these two forces, tension and order, guide a lot of compositions I see of other photographers as well. And when I photograph, I try to build frames around strong lines and clear geometry, but always leave room for a little bit of mystery, for asymmetry, for a sense of unresolved emotion. And here we specifically waited for the light to hit at the buildings and create those strong lines of light because they create the impact. They're what creates the frame. And of course, you center the human, or here a little bit off center, because architecture is not just about structure, it's about human feeling. And I feel classical cinema shows us we can express emotion without a single word, simply by how we arrange space, or how we wait for the light, or how we choose to compose our frames. And one of the great paradoxes of all architectural photographers, we're obsessed with movement, even though the medium is still. So films by Tarkovsky, Fellini, Wong Kar-wai taught me that to look for movement, not as something that happens in front of the camera, but something that happens inside of the frame. And I would really like you to have a look at a few frames. Fellini is my favorite. There are various movies of Fellini. He's probably the director I admire the most. And the way he expresses himself brings so much emotion and movement in each frame. You can study them literally for years. So even in moments of stillness like this, Fellini's frames pulse with potential and energy. Characters stay motionless, but their expression, gestures, and the surrounding environment suggest so much unseen movement. The framing captures an emotional or psychological tension, a kind of waiting, a kind of anticipation. And it pulls the viewers. And this is what we need to be doing, pulling the viewers into the scene's emotional undercurrent. So I always look at how to create this type of movement, because movement can be the wind blowing a curtain, or like here, the light was spectacular. The little girl moving through the frame and pushing the curtain with her hands creates such strong sense of movement. Or you don't even see it, but the desert dust in the background lifted by the wind. Movement can be as subtle as this, and it's almost invisible in the frame. But I waited for it for a while for this to happen. And it was absolutely worth it to wait, because I think this is what actually makes a shot. Even if the viewer doesn't see it immediately, I think they feel it. And this image has been one of the ones from Desert Rock, which I did this year in Saudi Arabia, which everyone talks to me about. And this image, everybody talks about. This image, the kids running through the shot. Catching moments like this is always very special. There is movement, but this image has a big significance for me, as there I did something all of those filmmakers did. They defied the rules. And a lot of people have asked me, are the rays of light real? And they are. There was a flare midday in my lens, and I almost moved away to wait for a better light. But then I thought, why not use it? And I shaded half of the lens, leaving the bottom part of the flare to look like rays of light. Big lessons from filmmakers. Be a rebel. That's kind of number one for me. And the sun peeking through the concrete. This is the hardest thing to catch in a frame, but this shows motion as well, because the sun moves every second. And you have such a short time to catch images like this when the sun hits the concrete, the right amount of the right amount and the right way, really. And when I photograph architecture, I try to think like a director, planning and tracking a shot. I let a lot of figures walk through them, or like here, I position it because they give life and scale, not as a prop, but as a reminder that architecture is lived, not admired from afar. And then sense of lived motion creates cinematic energy inside of a still photograph. In classical cinema, especially films of De Sica, Visconti, Chaplin, taught me something very fundamental. Great storytelling happens when the environment becomes part of the character's inner world. So in architecture, we often marvel at form, at material, at structure, at details. But really, what I have learned from cinema is that the human story embedded in a space is just as important. So when I photograph a home, I think about what it means to belong. Uh, we can make people look longer by creating a feeling of calm, zen, and intimacy, like in this image, or by revealing how people actually live there and inhabit the space. Some days I feel like paparazzi spend hours following homeowners, capturing small, authentic moments of their routines. And other times, we very gently choreograph scenes to evoke that irresistible sensation of I want to be there. Because this is what you need to evoke. Um, and when I photograph museums, I want to create feeling about time, memory, and identity. In art galleries, the connection between people and art, of course. And I specifically love going again and again and again back to Bourse de Commerce in Paris. Tadawando did the renovation, and every year there is another exhibition in the Rotunda. And you can see how architecture can become a chameleon and be experienced in different ways with the different exhibitions. And I spent 2 days there on my last trip. This was a couple of years ago. 2 days is something I never do in photography. We have to shoot fast, get images to press. I had my headphones, usually listening to cinematic movie soundtracks. I especially love Ennio Morricone and Vangelis, and the music allows you to see more somehow, to feel more, as you're becoming character of that movie too. This was again, as I said, 2 years ago. Kim Soo-jo was the artist. She did reflecting mirror panels on the floor, and you can see two different images. The light sunlight reflected, created cinematic shadows. Every second was different, and you can create impactful images. But the overcast image for me is the more significant one on the right, because you can see here that interaction with people and art, with people, with others, and with themselves. And the couple looking at each other, I think about Bresson in those moments, couple looking at each other, and everyone else around was looking at their reflection. And here you have a story, a moment you can stop and look at. And cinema gave me emotional vocabulary to translate space into human narrative. So in my work, I hope architecture becomes a stage, not an empty one, but one there are traces of human presence remaining, even if no one is physically there. Because when there is an emotional connection with the images, where when everyone can find something for themselves, we've achieved our goal. And I return to poetry, Ozu and Tchaikovsky. They share a belief in that quiet miracle of the everyday. This is a great image of Tarkovsky, set of Stalker. He shows us that the world has spiritual texture, dripping water, old walls, wind through the trees. His cinema is tactile and also shows us that a hallway, a doorway, or a tatami room can hold an entire lives within them. Both filmmakers remind me that architecture is not just physical, it's emotional and metaphysical. And this is a very famous frame of Ozus where he focuses the whole frame on one vase and he stays there for a while. Um, the only thing you can see is the movement of the bamboo. It's really mesmerizing. And when I take a photo of a building, I'm often trying to capture not just form, but its soul, the way the air feels in the room, the way the light falls on the floor, the way the silence sounds inside of the walls. Because cinema has taught me the images can hold memory, longing, presence all at once. And this is what I would like the heart of my work to be. In this sense, the architect designs a space, but the photographer designs that cinematic experience of that space, or photojournalistic as well. It could be either. In a world of fast content, quick impressions, and endless scroll, classical cinema offers an antidote: purpose. Classical films create emotion. They ask us to sit with the images, to absorb them, to reflect. And they treat the viewer with respect, assuming we're capable of very deep attention. But are we? I think things are changing. I have always said I want my photographs to make people stop. We need to stop sometimes and have a visual piece. I want to remind them of their bodies in space and to make them feel something real and unhurried. And as closing thoughts, I wanted to talk about why I chase light and what I hope people to feel. If I had to summarize how classical cinema influences my work, I would say this. Cinema taught me to see, architecture taught me to interpret, photography allows me to translate. And every time I lift the camera, I'm so grateful for it. I'm chasing the decisive moment, not because I fear missing it. Actually, I truly believe that I can somehow summon the moment, but because I know it contains layers of meaning, shaped by everything I've learned from the great filmmakers, the great movies, from photojournalists, from the people from my childhood, from the darkroom, from the light, from life, from you, from the people that I meet every day. I especially love the shot of the Fondazione Prada bioma because when I was photographing, I thought, would it be amazing in if in this moment when I framed the shot, a woman in red to pass by, and literally seconds later, I had not only a woman in red, but a woman in an incredible high fashion dress pass by. It was like a movie, and I remember thinking about the the 30s when I took this specific shot, men going to work in their suits almost felt like time has stopped and I had transported myself in a different era. And the beautiful hazy lights made that sensation even stronger. Or making a illegal U-turn, not recommended, in the middle of Vancouver to take a photo of Alberni by Kangokuma, as the light going through the fog was creating the most incredible silhouette of the shape of the building. If this was a movie, there'll be smoke machines and so much production behind a shot like this. In photography, you need to be brave enough to do a U-turn when you see the light. Because in the end, photographing architecture is not about capturing the perfect angle. It is about revealing the life inside of a structure. It is about emotion. It is about memory. It is about light and silence, rhythm, tension, and humanity. And the main thing, it is about bringing cinema into the stillness of a single frame. And this is what it is for me. So thank you. That was my 2 cents about connections between cinema, photojournalism, and architectural photography. I'll stop sharing the screen. There
Hi,
probably will be some questions. Hi, how are you
yes.
doing?
Hi, how are you? Congratulations on the presentation. It was very interesting for us to learn more about your relationship with
Thank you.
cinema. And we'll now move on to the audience's questions. So a quick reminder to
Sure.
everyone to feel free to send in your questions through the Q&A tab. And we already have a first question, which is, what makes a great collaboration between the architect and the photographer?
Um, so I talked quite a lot about this actually recently because I feel one of the most important things is not only to connect, but it is to for two people to actually understand each other. And I've spoken about Corbusier and Lucien Hervé and all of the kind of amazing collaborations that have happened with architects and photographers. And I think it is more understanding the person as well as understanding what they love and how they think to be able to actually create something special. Because I mean, Corbusier and Hervé traveled together for many years. They saw the world in a similar way. So I think that's the most important. It's actually that personal connection. It's not about the marketing team sending you with a PDF of images to go out and or ideas to go out and to take photos. It is a lot more about that connection between you and the architect.
Great. And the next question is, with the rise of fast-paced digital content, how do you maintain depth and storytelling in a world that wants instant visual gratification?
And this is what I was talking about in the presentation. I feel what is missing nowadays is emotion in the photos. And filmmakers did exactly this. They actually had incredible emotion in their movies, and especially, I mean, you saw Fellini's frames. It is so impactful. I can sit. I actually, when I was doing the research for the talk and I was pulling my favorite frames of Fellini, I thought it is unbelievable how he can hold your attention, somebody who worked years and years ago. And so I feel we can't just photograph for the sake of photographing. To stop a person in their tracks takes a really incredible design, but it also takes really incredible photography. And the one thing that sometimes happens is sometimes not that incredible design could become incredible by doing images that are striking as well. So there has to be a balance, but I think we're lacking emotion. I think just
Mhm.
going and photographing, lifting the camera and just doing few shots is not the way to go. You can still create a photojournalistic type of images, but you also need to add the emotional factor into them.
Great. And
You
another
need to be
question.
invested as a
Yeah.
photographer because you need to care about the project as much as the architect cares about the project. It's your project when you take it. It's you're an integral part of it.
Yes, we have another question. I think it relates to what you were saying about your creative process. So, how do you balance documenting the architect's intent with creating your own artistic narrative?
That's a very good question. So often the architects have ideas of the building, but I think that it's you have to follow what they want to capture, of course, because there are specific lines and specific parts of the architecture that even sometimes I don't think about photographing. So having this input is important. But one of the things I love the most is when you can actually hear from an architect that they have seen the building in a different way through your eyes. So I think you should be able to also inspire the architects about their own work because they spent so many years doing that building that somehow they're seeing when I go with an architect in a building, they're like, okay, here are the deficiencies, here's what didn't go right. And suddenly the building for them is no longer that beautiful piece of art they've created. There's so much history in those 5, 6 years they were building that you need to actually make them feel excited again of how amazing their building is because we don't see those little kind of deficiencies and issues.
No, that's great. And how important is teaching photography to architecture students?
I think it's so important and it never happens. Do you know, like the only university that actually like invited me to do a whole 4 days of workshop was Centro in Mexico City. And I wonder why when photography is the really how the world sees architects' work. Why are architecture students not taught photography? So I think it's very, very essential, and I really hope one day it's included in the curriculum of most of the universities around the world. Because, like in Central, we have tremendous fun with the interior architecture program.
And we'll now jump into the final question. And what advice would you give to young photographers trying to enter the architectural field today?
There are a couple. So the first thing is don't start from the top. Start from work with the builders, work your way into an industry. Don't expect that everybody's waiting for you because I think that again that instant lifestyle that we're having at the moment, we have expectations. Even I have expectations that suddenly things will happen immediately. Um, there was a reason why people were apprentices years and years ago, because they started from the bottom and suddenly they were seen rather than you going and wanting to be seen. It's so important the world to see you organically. Um, and the second one is be authentically yourself. Think about all of those elements. I didn't think about how cinematography has impacted me almost ever until recently because I always thought photojournalism has shaped me. And then I thought, wait for a second. I watched Fellini when I was super young because I was in a filmmaking family. So there are layers to yourself that you don't even think about. Somebody almost has to remind you. So always look in that multi-layered personality, what shapes you, and show it to the world.
Great. Do you have another question?
How do you plan to have you?
Okay, great. That's another question. How do you plan to have people? And do you have models on hand? And if so, do you have wardrobe to make it all happen? So in terms of having human scale on your photography.
Yes. So I try to. In some of the houses that we're photographing, I always say, okay, I would like either to use the homeowners. If the homeowners are not open, then we use somebody from the architects team. Will have either someone in white or in black, of course, like the classical. But for the commercial projects, I try to work around events or try to, I mean, I just photographed an art gallery, and because it was not fully open yet, and it was on a university campus, Tina, who works with me, and myself, like we went outside, we gathered groups of students that didn't know at all what's happening. We would go and say, okay, do you mind coming with us? And we would put them in. You have to just have absolutely no fear of communicating with people when you're photographing public buildings, because your shot depends on adding those people and showing the world that buildings are made for people. So so we choreograph, but also we try to wrangle people very often as well.
That's great. Well, thank you, Emma, for answering all the questions and
Thank you
for the
so much.
great webinar today. And we really love
Thank
your work.
you.
And now we
Thank
have
you
to
so
wrap
much.
up for our next presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Ema. It was so great seeing your presentation.
Thank you, Amanda.
And now we're going to welcome Rasmus. But just before welcoming Rasmus and introducing him, there's a question here also. How can we get this webinar session after the session? And well, thank you so much for these questions. Just clarify, because I really forgot to mention this before we started the webinars. But just to clarify to everyone who might be wondering the same thing, while the live webinar is free to attend, the recording will be available exclusively for our YouTube members. So if you're interested, you can find us on YouTube and become a member to watch this session again, as well as access recordings of other webinars and talks, including lectures from our international forum, which was truly an incredible experience. So finally, let's welcome Rasmus. He's a Danish photographer specializing in architecture, interiors, and urban environments. Trained as an architect, he holds a PhD in architecture and urban studies with a research focus on coastal territories in the Anthropocene. His work combines photography, research, and mapping the creative to create visual narratives that explore architecture within its broader spatial and environment context. So thank you, Rasmus, so much for being here. And please tell me how to pronounce correctly your surname, because for me it's so difficult.
Yeah, it's impossible. You say Hjortshøj, so not that interesting, but only a Danish name, so it's a little difficult to pronounce. But thank you for the great introduction, and thanks to Architecture Hunter for inviting me, and thanks for everyone who's listening in. And thanks to you, Emma, for super interesting and beautiful presentation. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, let's jump into it. I'm just going to share my screen.
Perfect.
Uh-oh. Are you seeing my screen
No,
from?
not yet. Okay, now we can see your screen.
Okay, that was lucky because I was getting stressed.
Now it's working. Thank you.
All right, super good. Well, my name is Rasmus Hjortshøj, and I'm a Danish architect and photographer, and I specialize in the representation of architecture and interior photography, and territorial photography, and I have a research branch in my studio called Coasts, where I study and map coastal territories, and I'm going to try to talk a little bit about that today. I come from a little town called Skagen, a little seaside community. when I was 20, I moved to Aarhus to study architecture and later moved to Copenhagen, where I've been working and having my office since. And about a year ago, me and my wife moved to Oslo for me to start another office there. So today I spend my time between Copenhagen and Oslo, and yeah, I travel extensively for assignments around the world, and but mostly in the Nordics. My talk today I call architectural atmosphere, framing environments through uh, uh, the majority of around architecture, being commissioned by architecture studios to try and visualize the essence of their built work, or to map and visualize larger areas, landscapes, places of heritage or transformation, and mainly for books and exhibitions. And you can say the aim of my work is to establish a connection between architecture and the environment and the viewer, and allowing a building or a landscape's qualities um, to atmospherically connect to the viewer, um, and be experienced through photography, and hopefully an immersive and meaningful way, one that goes beyond merely documenting, but also tries to investigate and bring forward the ideas of the architects or the curators or the editors that are especially important to unfold. So when I photograph architectural projects, I try to convey a sense of place, and to illustrate how architecture interacts with this context, and with its users, and inscribing the structures into their urban context, and try to show the environment that they are part of. And I think this, in many ways, is what you call atmosphere. The time of day, the season, the weather, and the people surrounding and populating a space always imbues that space with a certain feeling or mood. And you can say that the term atmosphere, on the one hand, it's a concept, a geophysical concept that has to do with the air we breathe, and how the sun is being filtered before it reaches us here on Earth, through the sky, and the tiny aerosols in the air reflecting light in the sky, creating swatches of color and light intensity that then illuminates the spaces around us. But on the other hand, atmosphere is also an aesthetic element. How the sky, the weather, and these rays of light make us feel and behave, and how one setting can be experienced differently over time, depending on how we, through our senses, perceive it and feel it. A certain ray of light or a foggy afternoon changes over time. A brief encounter, or maybe simply just a composition that makes you see a place differently than you would have just by passing by. And aesthetics is a unique trait of humans. It's based on our human senses, but also on how humans have the ability to think conceptually, to sense the world and to reflect on things that not only exist, but also on the things that make us feel how or why things matter to us. And atmosphere is part of this aesthetic sensibility to the world around us. And to frame this feeling and these moments that happen around us through visual media is, of course, not always possible, not with the same sense as when you experience it on first hands, not at all. However, I think parts of it, or a fraction of a certain mood or feeling, can be represented as something that does matter to us, not as a copy of a physical experience, but something other that holds its own qualities and charms and characteristics. So So in this sense, when it comes to photography or any other type of representation, the image is never neutral. It's always a fraction of the world taken out of the context and presented to you as something else. So um, so how I started photographing was actually while I was working in architecture offices. From 2008 to 16, I worked as a practicing architect, doing mainly competitions on building scale and master planning scale for a total of 8 years, really loving it. I first worked at 3XN and then Sled, and finally Koba Architects, where I worked for 5 years and where my career really developed. And I got into photography by taking pictures for Kobe next to my job as an architect there. I'd always loved image making, but this was the first time I started taking photography seriously. So I would photograph the studio's projects so they would fit the narratives that we, the architects, were trying to emphasize. We, the design team, would always have these weekly pinups on how the design of a building and urban space would be represented and experienced. And it was a real demanding process to always have continuous critiques, but also very rewarding to select drawings, models for use, the best to underline our design intentions. It really helped sharpen the choices and focus of the most important aspects to communicate when you communicate something very complex like architecture. So here we see Nørreport, the most busy station area in Denmark, and the adjacent plaza of Israel's Plads that used to be a big parking spot. And we in the studio, we wanted to show how this area had been transformed and the new public life that had evolved between these new building elements, trying to frame a vital part of Copenhagen and the typical Copenhagen lifestyle. So these images became a conversation in the studio of how our design actually performed in real life, capturing it in images, which then again would feed into our decision making in the studio. So these were the things I took with me while taking pictures. It became kind of a keen understanding of architectural facets and how to best communicate them. So for me starting out as a photographer, my main concern was learning how to use the camera. The content of the images I actually already had a lot of experience with, but this also means that today I have quite a lot of insight into these discussions that are taking place in the design studios, what architects like to emphasize and find meaningful, which also then means what I myself find interesting, since I'm an architect, which is important to have your own convictions about things and have your own intentions when you go out and, like me, photographing or documenting the world. So it's about a clarity and a purity and a straightforwardness when representing projects. It's about the images not being overly romantic, but still having a certain vibrance or life to them. I don't really think it's so important to have a violet sky to understand a piece of architecture. I think a neutral background often works better and helps to keep focus on the building design. So clear straight lines are always very important for me. For example, I always try to honor the architects who've spent countless hours perfecting an elevation drawing. Because once a building is complete, these nuances are often overlooked. So I always try to compose my images so that these crucial elements stand out, or at least get noticed and appreciated. So you could say that my method in a way is split in two. On the one hand, it's quite precise and rigorous in terms of how I compose and plan my photos. However, at the same time, I always try to work as freely as I can while on site and letting my gut feeling direct me. The end result is a combination of the two, trying to have the clean, precise images blend with the more intuitive and felt compositions. I really like working my way around a building, showing how it works in a way, and trying to pick up on some of the small moments that happen between a building or a place and the people inhabiting it or just visiting it. It's sporadically, like the ferry terminal here in Naoshima. Photographing that was a pivotal point for me because that was a point in time where I was really contemplating what my future would be, and I wasn't only just impressed by the clarity of the design, but also um, just this feeling of diving into a building that was so different during the day and with a design that really struck me. It really inspired me to start my own company. Um, but in terms of style when I'm photographing or my vision, it's I do like a very calm image that is accentuating the geometry and the composition, and I try to capture how the most arbitrary angle, the most straight on angle can make a building stand out in a way that you perhaps wouldn't notice when you just walk by it. Um, Actually, from the very get-go, when I just started photographing, I've been interested in what I guess you can call a desaturated aesthetic. Not only desaturation of colors, that's something I did very much in the start. I don't do it so much anymore, but it's more like an overall desaturation um, of the atmosphere, or let's call it a non-romantic approach to photographing. So by applying a very tight framing and only rendering what's necessary to unfold a certain narrative, I think it's possible to uncover or highlight elements that sometimes gets diminished by the overly saturated when it becomes too romantic. So when successful, I think that this approach can kind of promote a certain mood or help convey an underlying relation to the building that can make a situation seem more or less timeless. Um, so in terms of inspiration, you might see in this image a resemblance between some of my images and this amazing art piece by Andreas Gursky. I can honestly say that this photograph was, as I saw it hanging in at an exhibition at the Louisiana Museum north of Copenhagen, this is what inspired me to go out and start photographing my own surroundings in Denmark. There was just something strangely familiar to this image. It had an atmosphere that just drew me in, and I felt that I had seen this place before, which I hadn't. It was uncanny, and it had a bleakness to it, but also a vibrance, a precision, but also an imperfection. It felt intimate, but also very monumental. So this was really just as a straightforward inspiration for me to go out and start looking at my own surroundings, something that you might find, or places that you might find banal because you know them so well, but when you start looking at them in a certain way, they start resonance differently. Andreas Gursky, he was actually a student of Bernd and Hilla Becker when he was studying in Düsseldorf, and probably my biggest inspiration in photography is the beautiful archival photos of industrial buildings documented by the Beckers. The way they try to objectively convey the world and its objects, and how these objects have evolved over time. It has this archival quality, an honesty and an humbleness to it that I really like. It's very much a matter of fact approach, just showing things as they are. Um, and they weren't just documenting objects, but also the territories these objects are inscribed to. So you understand how complex territories are defined by the networks of their objects. So it's a system theory thinking that they were working with that you could see in their work, and that's something they carried with them when they were part of the exhibition called New Topographics, photographs of the man-altered landscape, held in 1972 in the George Eastman House. And this exhibition was meant to draw attention to a new troubling understanding of the relationship between the human, the individual, and nature. This image here is by Robert Adams, his fantastic photograph from the exhibition, where he manages to tie together the duality of the American West by framing the ancient topography of the mountain ranges with the temporary mobile tract houses that shot up in the US in the post-war era. So it's this duality between the fleeting, something that is non-permanent, and the ancient time of the landscape. And he did this through a non-judgmental artistic style, showing places for what they really were. It was a style inspired especially by Ed Ruscha, who was one of the foremost photographers to introduce photography as a legitimate art form in the 1960s. Ruscha would make his own books with conceptual photographs showing the often less appreciated places of post-war America. And he did this in this deadpan style, photographing things just as they are, simple, unembellished, just like we saw with the Beckers and Robert Adams. And his book titled 26 Gasoline Stations that you see here shows this type of image making, which led to the new topographics groups to just show the environment for what it is. No need to romanticize it too much. Later, Russia mounted a camera on the side of his car, driving down the Sunset Strip in LA, photographing every building on the street, stitching the images together and presenting them as these foldouts. So it was almost like a drone-like approach where his method for photographing became the primary image maker, and him as the photographer almost took the passenger seats. And I think his work together with the systems theory studies of the Beckers helped photography become conceptual art. But for me, it's very interesting because the method and the concepts help to question how the surroundings can be perceived through imagery that is driven by conceptual. And so this leads me to the other part of my work. In 2016, I decided to stop drawing architecture and instead go solo and pursue my own career and my interest in photography, coupled with my interest in the relationship between coastal environments and our coastal societies. It was an interest that grown in me since I did a long sailing trip some years prior to this, while I was taking a little break from architecture. So while working at Kobe, I formulated an application for this artistic scholarship to study coastlines and coastal planning, which I got. So I took a leave of absence and started my company, Coast Studio. And this led me to an invitation to interview for a PhD position at the Aarhus Architecture School, focusing on coastal territories in the Anthropocene. And I received my doctoral degree in 2021, and the project was called Territory of Entanglements. And it's about how urbanized coastal territories can be represented through photography. And entanglement refers to this concept of the Anthropocene, the human epoch, the time we live in now, where the human made and nature is entirely entangled, and where we might seem to be part of a larger system, one where what seems to be natural and wild is always conditioned by a human logic in a way. Um, and the coastal territory is particularly interesting here because it's a stretch of land and sea that is often perceived as natural and untouched. However, in reality, it's a curated, nurtured, and often constructed set of spaces. And in many ways, it becomes a manifestation of how humans not only adapt to their surroundings, but also appropriate their surroundings to better fit human societal needs. It's more like an utilitarian way of thinking, where the landscape has to comply with how we as society want them to behave. So here on the left, you see an image of an obviously a constructed coastal barrier where you have the ocean to the left and you have the inland marsh areas to the right. And on the right-hand image, you have what I at least would often have called a wild stretch of nature. But in fact, this stretch of nature is also being maintained. It's just done in ways that are often out of sight. In the wintertime, sand is deposited on the beach so it won't change its form. Marine grass is planted in the dunes to hold on to the sand so you won't have sandstorms. And in many ways, it's just as much of protective barrier and curated and nurtured and programmed as the barrier to the left. So this project is very much in line with the thinking behind the new topographics exhibition in post-war America. But this time, however, it's in Danish context, in the everyday landscapes where I grew up myself. So in the PhD, I've focused on the Danish West Coast mostly as an urbanized, but also a natural coastal territory in one of the world's most urbanized countries, which Denmark is. And I compare this to the East Coast, where you find the metropolitan area of Copenhagen, which is perceived to be entirely urban, but where nature very much also conditions how the urban environment functions and is experienced. And I try to communicate that now in the time of the Anthropocene, where the distinction between what's natural and what's man-made has become so vague that it's difficult to separate. Landscapes that you see as natural are often constructs of humans, and what's clearly human-made is always rooted in a natural context. So there's not really a division between nature and culture anymore. So it's a condition of entanglement that creates a shift in how architectural and landscape architectural strategies are being formulated and communicated, and therefore also how they can be represented. As in this image where you have different types of land fortifications or coastal fortifications, but one is just more obvious than the other. But at the end of the day, they're all the same. So when I work out in the field, I do it through a term that I call territorial photography, and here I combine mapping with photography to highlight the urban aspects of the coastal territories. So I've developed a method where I transect the coastal territories. I make these incisions or sections. So rather than just following the coastline, I walk across the coastal territory perpendicular to the coastline. And I follow a predetermined path, almost like Russia driving his car down the street. And I just, like a drone, I register the physical spaces and structures that I come across on the way. And it's a way of trying to tie together the coastal foreland, which is something that often seems natural and beautiful, with the hinterlands, the areas that support and affect the foreland, but are only appreciated to a lesser degree than the beautiful coastal foreland. So here the photograph becomes an important research tool. I try to reposition photography from being typically a supplement to the map to being the actual mapping device itself. So these sections that I make have produced a large archive, effectively mapping parts of the Danish coastal areas in our current time, and together they show how the urban is inseparable from nature. So when I photograph landscapes on the coast, I see them also as man-made shapes and spaces. It's difficult to distinguish what is architecture and what is landscape, and perhaps we don't need to. They're all part of the same entangled mesh. So therefore, when I study territories, I find that some of the virtues of architectural photography has the potential to capture and highlight these elements of the environment that are often overlooked in the more traditional forms of landscape representations, including the intricate details, the straight lines, the urban atmospheres of the man-made. So in a way, my work is representing buildings tied into how I also represent environments, and the other way around. They feed into each other, architecture and territory, and they're all connected through a certain sense of atmosphere and aesthetics. Yeah, so thank you.
Hi, Rasmus. Thank you for sharing your work with us. And we'll now move on to the Q&A session with the audience. And we have the first question already, and it is, your work has a very distinct visual identity, as you mentioned, and especially in the way that you use color and atmosphere. How consciously do you cultivate that signature, and how much of it emerged naturally over time?
Well, when I started out photographing, as I said, it was I had this tendency to desaturate everything, the colors and maybe also the subject matter was something that was quite unnuanced in a way. Today it's involved in a way where I don't need to desaturate the color so much. It's more having an image that is not, where you don't maybe exaggerate too much what it is you're trying to show. I think that's a way to stay true to the subject. It can be the landscapes where you stay true to what they actually are and start, instead of trying to invent something, invent a new storyline about them. But in terms of architecture, photographing for architecture studios is also about being true to their work, and most often their buildings is fantastic and joyful to see just from a plain deadpan angle, like when Russia was photographing gasoline stations. But of course, I merged that with a lot of other aspects. We're trying to show the details and the rays of light that comes in and illuminate the space and so forth.
Yes, I think I have another question that kind of relates to that subject, which is talking about the desaturation also. Does that work for the architects that you are shooting for, or is that more for you? And it is incredibly beautiful, but it's a style. So I just imagine it might not work for everyone. So
yeah. When I started out, it's some years ago, and that was actually a little bit. I think that we at Kobe, both designing but also me photographing, we were maybe kind of pushing this style a bit, where we were desaturating things both in our visualizations and my imagery, and it was something that worked back then. But as time went by, I also myself thought that it was not really representative of what I was photographing, and and both for myself and for my clients, I don't desaturate the colors so much even more, but I also don't exaggerate them, which is quite clear. So I try to keep it neutral, but it has a lot to do also the light that I'm photographing in. I do like to photograph in slightly overcast days where you don't have so many harsh shadows that might take away some of the details of the building. So it's a mix. It's a mix
Mhm.
of.
Yeah, we have another question. I think you just talked a little bit about that as well, which is how much do you plan for weather conditions? And if you had to pick a light or weather to shoot for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Yeah, I plan a lot. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's not possible to plan. You get maybe you get a call up on the 18th of April, and they need images on the 20th for the museum opening. So you just make the best out of what you have. And other times, I plan extensively, especially for these landscape series like the image that's on the screen now. It's um, I made this crazy dogma for myself that everything has to be shoot in the same lighting conditions. So photographing over 3 years, always chasing the same lights where it had to be cloudy but not too cloudy, and a little bit of sun peeking through. But that would also be the kind of light that I would choose for the rest of my time. It's when you just have a thin layer of clouds, just making the shadows feel a little bit like you're in a photographic studio. Um,
Yeah, that's nice. And how wide or narrow the focal length do you often shoot or love the most using?
I can see that I'm using um, mostly something around 24 plus 85. So it means that I'm either quite wide but not extremely wide, and I'm quite zoomed in but not very long telephoto. So it's a little bit in between. I have a lot of images where I go very wide because I do like to have a whole facade, and sometimes you can't back up enough. So you need something that's like maybe a 17 millimeter tilt shift to kind of show a certain part of a building. But otherwise, I would say if I can choose just one lens, it would probably be a 24 or a 35 millimeter. All the landscape images are on 35 millimeter.
Great. And what are the biggest changes that you've witnessed in architectural photography over the past years?
Hmm. I don't know what yeah, okay, yeah, of course, the biggest changes actually have been like when I started out. Some clients actually preferred to photograph in the wintertime because there weren't any leaves on the trees, so you could just see the building more clearly. Also, landscape wasn't a big deal if there was grass or not. It wasn't the focal point. And today it's completely opposite. Now it's super important that the landscape and the building are affecting each other, and you always have leaves on the trees to show that there's a relationship between the environment and the building. So that's definitely what has changed the most. And going forward, I'm curious to see what will happen with all the new technologies that are introduced with AI and so forth. I feel myself that I'm almost revolting now. We have so much. My feed is just filled with videos made of AI, and I just feel that if I can see that they are AI, I don't even want to watch them. And I'm wondering if the same thing will happen in our field. That as soon as you can see too much editing, too much perfectness, that you might just turn it off, thinking that it's something that was prompted rather than something that was captured.
Yes. And we'll now jump into the final question, which is the same one that we asked Emma. And what advice would you give to young photographers trying to enter the architectural field today?
I spent a lot of time in the start just trying to get as much knowledge in as possible, and when I started photographing back then, I got a lot of praise from my colleagues. They thought it was so good, the work I was doing. So I got a lot of what's called self-confidence. But today, when I see those images, they weren't really that good. So sometimes it's also that you just have to follow your naive intuition and just do something, and gradually you'll become better. And probably it takes like a 5 year period, and then you'll have it all down, and you can just see where you want to go from there.
Yeah, that's a great advice. Thank you so much, Rasmus, for the webinar today. It was amazing to learn more about your work and your approach. And yes.
Thank you, Rafael.
Thank you, Rasmus. It was amazing to have you with us, really.
You too,
And
Amanda.
by the way, I wanted to share something with you because I actually have a book composed entirely of your photographs. The one on the silo by Kobe.
Oh, really? Well, fantastic to hear. That was
Yeah,
one of my fun. I didn't have that many pictures of this year, but that was fun from before construction to after.
yeah, it was amazing. Like
Thank
the
you.
whole process. I love this
Yeah,
book.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's truly a delight. And the book brings me so much calm and joy every time I open it. So
Wow.
congratulations on
Thank you
your
so
work.
much, Amanda. That's such a joy to hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And well, as we close today's sessions, I want to share how meaningful it feels to end up the year with a webinar dedicated to architectural photography. In many ways, it feels like completing a full circle. Throughout the year, we've talked about architecture from so many angles: ideas, processes, practices, responsibilities, materiality, cities, sustainability, and the evolving role of the architect and the designer in shaping the world, and ending the cycle by talking about the act of recording architecture feels deeply symbolic. Photography marks that pivotal moment in a project's journey when the architect's role, at least in its most active form, comes to a close. It's the moment when a work is no longer just a project, but it becomes a place, a home, a public realm, a lived experience. So, through photography, architecture is handed over to the world, and it stops being only about creation and becomes about memory, interpretation, and encounter. So, ending our year with these conversations feels not only appropriate, but poetic. So, thank you so much, Emma and Rasmus, for your generosity, your insight, and for reminding us the profound care behind how architecture is seen, felt, and shared. And since every ending is also a beginning, I'm happy to share that next year's webinar cycle will open just like this year's did, with a full week of webinars from January 20th to 23rd. We'll have a different theme each day, and would love to see you all there. Our webinars remain completely free, so feel free to visit our website and register, because many speakers are already confirmed and more will be announced very soon. So, to everyone who joined us today, to all the incredible speakers who shared their knowledge with us throughout 2025, and to all our global audience, thank you. This community makes everything we do meaningful. So, we're wishing you all the wonderful holiday season, and we look forward to seeing you again in the new year.